Hey everybody, welcome to the Tech Founder Show. It's Tony's Eyes, joined by Andy Helko. Andy, I wanted to get your feedback on the healthcare benefits industry. Was that one of the most consumer-friendly places to be?
Yeah, it's pretty special, and I think being a founder myself, a business owner, having to help employees through that is not exactly the easiest or least expensive. So why do you ask?
I ask simply because today's guest is Dr. Prashant Srivastava. He co-founded Evive in 2007 after recognizing healthcare was moving towards a consumer model, but there wasn't anything consumer-friendly about that space, the healthcare benefits industry. So he launched Evive, and I want to hear all about it. We'll pull him on here, and he can tell us more. So, Prashant, how you doing today?
Good. Good to see you guys. Hi, Tony. Hi.
Likewise. Yeah, so we like to kick off the conversation talking about that space you're in, and to the point that I have in my notes here, healthcare benefits industry, not a consumer-friendly place. So tell us, high level, what's Evive all about? What are you guys doing there?
So, Andy, when was the last time you went to a doctor's office, had no idea what things were going to cost, and found out later how much you owe, right? Try buying a car that way. Like, hey, take this car away and we'll send you the bill later. And by the way, there's no sticker price for it. You have no idea what it's eventually going to end up costing you. And so as I said back in 2006, and everybody was sort of heralding the new era of consumerism, healthcare spending accounts and the like, what I realized was that healthcare benefits were anything but consumer friendly. And there was a lot of data out there. So Target had just, I don't know if you guys remember, but Target had begun couponing using your data. So today it's kind of second nature. You go to we have a Jewel Osco here in Chicago. And if I check out with with milk, it gives me a coupon for laundry detergent, probably because I haven't bought laundry detergent in 30 days and I might be out. And so those types of things that sort of keep track of what you have bought, and we do this all the time on Amazon today, right? It says based on what you bought before, here's what you might need. Back in 2006, Target was just starting that. And I said, look, here's a way where people are using data to recommend things that you might need next. And in healthcare, a lot of data exists, right? Every time you go to a doctor's office, a trail of data is created and sent to the insurance company to pay. And that trail of data sort of gets all sort of piled up and aggregated. And a lot of people do analysis on the past. They say, oh, last year, Andy, your business spent XYZ on cancer, XYZ on maternity. But no one's taking the data and influencing the future. And so we sat there and said, look, how will consumers have guidance on how to navigate the system? We've got to build an intelligent navigation system for people that kind of helps them with what they might need in the future, holds their hand and shows them the way. And that's how Evive is born.
The one thing that I always like to try and put it into is, what's the day in the life of one of your customers to help our audience understand what you do?
Yeah. So our primary, so we sell this product business to business, but our users are real end users, right? So we sell it to a company such as yours, and then you would offer it to your employees who download an app that's now on their phone. And we keep track of sort of what's going on in their lives, what medications they're filling, et cetera, in a very HIPAA safeguarded way. But what we might do is we might pop up on their phone with a notification that says, hey, you may want to consider a mammogram because you're of the age and risk that a mammogram is recommended for you. And so that sort of, and then we tell them how to get it, right? And how much it should cost them and stuff that normal consumers need to make good decisions, informed decision making. And so if you think about sort of us as the helpful assistant that's keeping track of these healthcare needs as people go about their busy lives, right? No one wakes up in the morning and says, what do my benefits cover today? And when they need it, there's not an easy way to figure that out. And so we're sort of providing both information in a push manner to say, here's what you should consider based on sort of who you are and what kind of risks you have, et cetera. and pull information on demand. So consumers can open the Evive app, log onto a chatbot, ask a question, get an answer. Or consumers can go and most likely what they're looking for is already recommended on the top for them and just navigate through to it.
Now I'm curious about a strategic question for the businesses. It sounds like you're layered on top of the companies, right? At the end of the day, they're the true customer. Was that a conscious decision or a requirement of the industry? Yeah, or did you try the consumer direct first and it didn't work out?
That's a great question. So very early on, this is a very strategic decision we had to make, right? How will we aggregate users? And the way almost all of healthcare in America works is you get benefits from your employer. Mm-hmm. And most employers above about 200 are self-insured, which means it's their dollars. So when an employee goes to the hospital, he or she may use a Blue Cross, Aetna, whatever card, but that card is very similar to the sort of MasterCard merchant sort of system, but it just processes the payment, but the actual cash comes out of the company at the end of the month. And so thinking about how healthcare money flows, right? Think about it this way. The employer sets aside a part of money. The employee goes to the doctor's office. They pay a portion of the whole bill, and the employer pays the rest. So now we have to think about how do we create a win-win-win proposition, right? The employer wins if you use healthcare wisely in two levels, right? One is you're healthy and you come to work and you produce the widgets they need or whatever you're doing for them. The second is that prudent use of healthcare reduces this pot of money that they have to set aside each year that seems to continue to expand, over the last 30 years at rates higher than inflation.
Yeah. Trust me, I know.
The second is sort of the employee, right? The employee wins because someone taking the tedious part of figuring out what they need to do next and make good decisions and presenting the information to them for free, right? So it's a winning proposition to the employee, it's a winning proposition to the employer, and it's winning to us because we get to connect these two dots and still produce what I would call a public health good in a for-profit setting.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm curious if we can go back a little bit. You talked about kind of why and what you started, but I'm curious about the journey. What were you doing before? And was this a side gig that became your main thing? Was it, hey, look, I'm going to bet the farm and go all in, do it from day one? What was your journey?
Great question. I might have to start a little bit at the beginning. So I arrived in the United States in 1997, literally with 2 suitcases to go do a PhD at Michigan State University. And so I was sort of a young science person. I finished my PhD in 3 years. I joined what is called Pfizer now in Kalamazoo. You might know it as the facility that produces the new vaccine. And so I was the head of technical services there, where we built the technology to bring these new drugs to market rapidly and scale them and so on. And as I was doing that, I realized how regulated the pharmaceutical industry is at. And I always had this sort of startup bug inside me. And I thought, pharmaceuticals is pretty regulated. I'm a PhD in chemical engineering. I don't know a lot about starting businesses. And so I went to business school at the University of Chicago. And realizing that pharmaceuticals are heavily regulated, you need deep pockets of money to innovate in pharmaceuticals, I decided to turn my attention to healthcare services and understanding how money flows. And that's when I learned a lot about sort of how employers are the ones paying the bills, even though you have the Blue Cross card, like all of these things where you understand really how money flows. And then you identify spots like the one I described, where you can align goals of various stakeholders in a winning fashion and build a business out of it. And so that's sort of a tortuous part. So I was this sort of mad scientist on the bench, scaling up drugs, creating new medicines to the market, went to business school sort of to change the orientation I had. I still use my PhD in terms of it teaches me how to break down big problems into small ones and sort of solve each small one at a time rather than sort of stare at something big. But it started out in chemical engineering. Today, it sort of is applied mathematics to intense modeling that predicts what you might use next.
So I would love to hear a little bit about just that, the technology that's under the hood, the predictive modeling. What are you guys doing? I know what's under the hood and how is that happening? Because it sounds pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so the key innovation USP for our product is personalization, right? We don't give you general advice. We don't tell you that it's National Mammogram Month, everybody program in this age group. What we are doing is we're keeping track of each individual's needs, predicting what might come next based on a transaction stream that they've done, not dissimilar to what an Amazon or Netflix does based on what you're watching, right? So they're tagging what you're doing, and then they're applying algorithms like combination filtering to then predict what they might recommend to you next. Our difference, and it's recognized by the Timmy Awards sort of 2 years, and we're using it for real good. We're not selling you jeans you don't want or shouldn't, or a car you wouldn't like. We're applying it to what is really good for you in a very neutral way. We don't get paid by advertising, recall, right? So it's not like we're pushing procedures on you that you don't need. We're actually becoming a trusted source of information for folks and showing up at the moments that they need us.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, this is kind of a random thing that came to my head, and we've never asked any tech founder this, so it's out of left field. But, when you were younger, what did you imagine your life to be? And I'm kind of curious, and the reason that I'm asking is, I'm always curious, like, do people know they're going to be an entrepreneur? Is that something that they envision as a kid? Or is this like a life journey thing that you end up in it?
That's a great question. I'll tell you my experience on that one, right? So I remember I was in 4th grade, right? I had a school library that had books falling apart, and I literally bound all the books, and I sort of charged a little service fee to my school. So that was sort of my first entrepreneurial venture. My dad is a business school professor, so I always lived on a business school campus and was surrounded by this. He teaches economics, not entrepreneurship. But I was in this setting where, lots of very bright young people came and sort of talked about business in the house all the time. But I was not interested in it. I was hardcore science. I had a chemistry teacher in 6th grade who totally changed my life. I had no plan B. I was going to be in chemistry or become like a milkman or something. And milkmen don't exist, so thank God I chose chemistry. But that was kind of where I was at. And so I went hardcore. I was like, I'm not going to, be like my dad in business. I'm going to go hardcore, be a scientist. And I did it, right? I reached sort of the pinnacle of that. I was 23 years old. I had a PhD in chemical engineering. I was working on these new drugs. I was living the dream. But at that point, I said, look, every objective I set for myself, I've already reached. I have this dream job. I'm helping save people's lives by bringing new drugs to the market. What am I going to do next? And so that sort of streak caused me to think about what has gotten me most joy. And I sort of ran a business with my dad on the side while I was an undergrad in chemical engineering. I had done that sort of little binding thing. I'd done off and on things. And I said, look, I want to have, my own business. I have all these ideas, but I didn't have that framework to say which one is the one I quit my job on, put my house on the line for. And that was what, Chicago Booth helped me do. I remember taking this class called Commercializing Innovation, and every week the Professor Meadow came in and said, here's a paragraph of information. Would you build a business and fund this business? And each week we would go out and call a bunch of people and figure out if there was demand for this product, what it would cost to. And so that got me the system of evaluating my ideas. My wife at the time would say, look, stop telling me all these stories that tell me the one you're going to do and let's just do it. And so once I had this construct of saying which idea is a good idea, when I came across this one, my co-founder and I decided this was the one we were going to bet the farm on. And we literally sort of, my oldest child was like 4 months old. And we're like, look, let's do it. There's never going to be a good time to do it. And of course, my dad's a professor. He's like, look, is this right? You have such a great job. You're doing great. And I said, look, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. So I got to go do it. And once you sort of commit to things happen on their own. Like we didn't know anything about a lot of things along the way. We started out this business as direct mail. So this was 2006-07, right? The iPhone had just come out and it wasn't so ubiquitous. So we had to reach our customers, users in ways that they were accustomed to. And so we would personalize, think of it as sort of personalized catalogs. You might have seen the Gland's End catalogs are different for each person. They've been different for 10 years. And so we said, look, we can do variable printing. Different people can do different things. And so we learned a lot about, the printing industry and stuff. And It's just when you commit to something, I feel like you solve the problem that's in front of you.
Along those lines, I love that point. Shifting from being a scientist, PhD, to a founder, an entrepreneur, very different, I imagine. And you said, when you commit to things, kind of things happen. So we've talked about the idea of, building the plane, on the way down. What was the biggest leap that you guys had to make that you didn't know how to do, that you just had to figure out in motion?
Well, there've been a lot of gaps that we have to overcome, right? The first one, as I said to you, we knew, so I had been in a business in between. As I graduated from the U of C, I joined a business that was in the healthcare services space. We helped people live better if they had a chronic condition. It's called disease management today. And so what we would do is we would identify folks who had diabetes, nurses would call them and sort of give them advice and so on. And so I had some familiarity with the self-insured employer space, how they take risks. So I knew how money flowed. I knew a lot of those things, right? What I didn't know at the time was how will we, do direct mailing, for example, which is kind of fundamental, right? You can analyze all these things, but you have no idea how you'll get this message out. And so we had to learn all of that, find good partners who would do that work. So we would do the technology work, we would do the publishing work, but we didn't do the printing and stuffing. They did it at scale, right? At millions of mailings going out. I had to learn a lot about sort of how postal systems work and how do we match what is inside the envelope and the address outside, because you don't want to send the wrong thing to the wrong one. And we redesigned sort of the envelope so that the address showed through the window, very trivial thing now. But we said, we don't have to match the address because the address shows through the window. So we can assure 100% quality. We don't have to rely on the printer for that. And so the little things come along, but these are critical decisions, by the way. If we get a wrong mailing to the wrong person, right? Your name on the front and someone else's envelope information inside, that's a huge HIPAA problem, and there's sort of lots of fines for that. And so we had to solve these very critical things as they came along. One of the key things we did was we sort of kept all the critical things in-house. So we outsource and use partnerships for many things. But, one of the lessons my co-founder, Peter Srivastava, always said was that, don't outsource the fueling of your airplanes if you're an airline, because if those guys don't show up on Christmas Day, it's just another day where they slowed work. For you, it's the Super Bowl Sunday of airline, and you have egg on your face, right? And so that actually happened at airlines in 1 year. So his lesson was don't outsource anything critical that you must do, right? So even today, we're on AWS, but we maintain our own data security teams because that's core to our business. We have to know where everything's at. We have to know that it's secure, because fundamentally, without that, we have no business, as an example. And then along the way, the technology changed. We had to retool building apps. We were doing this printing stuff, and we're like, look, there's an era coming where everybody is going to be on their phones. We're about 2 or 3 years away from it, but we better start pivoting to things that are going to be the future. And we started building apps when I had no experience building apps. But again, as tools have improved over time, when we committed to that problem, we solved it. At Evive, it's sort of, once we identify the problem, scope it out, we have a bunch of people who are committed, smart, and dedicated to figuring it out. And my role is mostly to identify the problems we want to solve, and then they sort of get together and we all collectively figure out how to do it.
I'm really curious what that initial stage of starting, and obviously you weren't a tech company at first, but how'd you find the first customer? How'd you start getting traction?
Great question. So we had been in a space that was similar, right? I was at a business with my co-founder where we were helping people sort of live better. And as a result, we had customers who were employers in that space. So we knew some of the people we would want to approach who were forward-thinking customers. But it's sort of the story of 1, 3, 10, 30. One gets one customer, proof of concept gets you 3 gets you 10, and that sort of gets rolling. And so we knew we had arrived when we met a third customer who we had never known, was not in our sort of network, and chose to buy the product. We're like, okay, now we're on to something. And then we got the fourth one, and very quickly we're up to 10. And so that journey today has gotten us to nearly 75 customers. But it sort of all started with 1, 3, 10, and creating, sort of delighting those guys.
I've never heard the 1-3-10 concept before.
Well, so all this is Peter Service, my co-founder's rules. It just, I internalize it. So I say it as if everybody might know it, but we always talked about like, let's get 1, and when we get 1, we'll get 3. And when
right.
3, we'll get 10. That's sort of the mantra here.
You kind of hinted at this, but what I'd really like to dig into, because I think a lot of our audience would be interested, is that transition from a business that wasn't very technical to technical. Like, what were some of the roadblocks, and how did you overcome them? And, you know, how did you shift mentality and staff, and what did it look like to make that?
Great question. I mean, we were sort of technical on one end when we were very sophisticated at data processing, but we were sort of low tech when it came to reaching the consumer, right? It was mail. And so in 2013, we committed to sort of building this business. And what we did was we opened a new development center. And when we started opening it, you know, we said, well, where is the manpower for this stuff? So we were in India, in Pune, and Pune is sort of the hub of outsourcing, BPO type stuff. And what we were opening was a totally different business, right? And so we said, where do we go to find these people? And we thought we would go to Chennai, where one of my sort of tech leads was from. But every resume we got was from Bangalore. And we're like, well, why are we going to Chennai if all the manpower is sitting in Bangalore? So we opened a new tech center in Bangalore, and we let it alone to build this stuff independently, right? So we said, look, go build out this framework independently while we operate this business. And as we sort of deprecated those customers, we built up a new customer base for the new product. And so as we were flying the airplane, we upgraded it essentially with a whole new set of people, new product organization, a whole new technology team. We still kept the data sort of subject matter expertise. We just merged that into it. And then we took sort of the customer services team and retrained them to sort of to represent a larger product. And that, I think, over time, as we've done that transition, you know, we've lost some people who had a hard time sort of looking at this change, and that's not what they wanted to do. And so we've sort of evolved as a company. And I think I was at the summer outing this year, and we looked around, and we might be sort of on the 2nd or 3rd generation of people, Evivers. But the spirit of Evive, which is like innovate, don't be afraid of solving a problem that people haven't solved before, still endures. And so I'm very proud of like the people that are sort of coming in, still having that feeling of, I can spot an Eviver, I say, from 10 miles away or in 10 minutes. And I think I still see, as I look around, a set of people who are dedicated to the mission and are really smart at solving the new problem we have at hand.
Was there any big challenge or roadblock that you guys had to overcome during that upgrade and evolution? And I'm sure it took years, but you know, for other founders that maybe are in a more traditional business looking to go towards tech, like, is there anything that you can give insight to of like big challenges or roadblocks you faced? Yeah,
I mean, I think, look, we had to dedicate ourselves to that, right? You can't have your feet in both worlds. You can't say, well, I'm going to keep growing this stuff and then I'm going to incubate that on the side. And so I think what we said was, look, we believe in this direction, that this is where the world is going. So all our incremental investment is going into that world. And we actively deprecated customers as that capability came along. And we said, look, you know, even though you're willing to pay us still, we just don't want to, we don't see ourselves in that business. We see ourselves in this business. And some of them came along. They said, yep, we agree with your direction. We think that's where the world is going. We want to give people more real-time guidance than guidance in the mail. And some came along, and others said, look, prove it out to me that you can do this digitally, and then we'll buy again. And we deprecated them. So there was sacrifice of business as we did that transition. And we were willing to do it because we believed in the new direction.
Prashant, I would love to hear a little bit about the dynamic between you and your co-founder, and how that's changed over time. So what are the areas, like the skill you both bring to the table?
That's a great question. So at the beginning, you know, Peter Service, my co-founder, was sort of the head of sales at my previous company. And so we had a very good demarcation. He said, look, you go take care of sales and I'll go build the rest of the business. And we'll meet, and our board meetings will be you and I making decisions. But over time, as the business became more technical, I stepped in to be the president and then eventually the CEO. And Peter took an executive chairman role. So he's still with the company. He's still our guiding light. But on a day-to-day basis, he's sort of stepped back and allowed me to sort of scale the business. I talk to him literally every day. I have this thing where we do the New York Times spelling bee and the crossword every day. And I send him mine and he sends me his. And that's our way of checking in, saying, you're okay, I'm okay. So we have a very close relationship, but I think I would say I'm very lucky to have a co-founder who said, look, this is the stage that requires not my skills, but yours. And you step in, I'll support you the rest of the way. Mm-hmm. And he's been a spiritual mentor, a sort of very dear friend to me all these years. We've been here 15 years together. We used to joke that we spend more nights together traveling in hotel rooms than we spend at home. And in the beginning, and for many years, even towards the sort of the tail end of the last 15, we used to room together because we're like, look, we're going to go sit down and watch ESPN at night and go to the meeting at morning. Why would we spend on 2 hotel rooms? And so, but we spend a lot of nights together sort of discussing, turning the model over its head, chatting over ESPN. And we still do that. It's just a different role that he's taken over and allowed me to continue to sort of scale the business in the tech heavy way that it required when we made this pivot.
You mentioned that he served as a bit of a mentor to you. Any others? What we like, on our show, we like to talk a lot about the importance of mentors and networks you might lean on of other founders and entrepreneurs.
Yeah, look, I would say, I've had mentors. I talked about my 6th grade chemistry teacher. I totally changed my life. Here was a kid sort of running around, decently intelligent, but had no idea what he was going to be. And suddenly I couldn't be anything but a chemical engineer or a chemist. Similarly, I was in engineering school and I was like, yeah, I have a job. I'm going to go do it. And I had a professor who said, look, you really have a lot to learn. You should go do a PhD. And he really believed in me. And I did some research for him. And that gave me the self-belief to take 2 bags and go to the United States. I'd never been outside of India before. So imagine this kid sort of, I've watched Baywatch and a couple other things, but that's the extent of what I knew. This was pre-internet days, so I'm kind of dating myself. But I arrive in Michigan and, I think, wow, it's the summer, right? It's August. I'm like, oh my God, this whole country looks like a golf course. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous. And then winter arrives. I've never lived in a place that is less than, I'm going to say 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and suddenly it starts to snow. And for the first couple of days, I'm like super enthusiastic, like a little kid. Then I realize, oh my God, this is kind of cold. I better do something about this. But then again, I had come here with a very specific idea in mind of what I wanted to do. And it was in the oil industry. And I suddenly got a mentor here who was in the biochemical space. And Dr. Wharton sort of changed my view of the world. He said, look, oil industry is interesting, but it's not where the future is at. The future is in biotech. And so you want to be at the future. And so I totally said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, and jumped right in. So at each stage, I think I've met a person who said, look, I believe in you, and here's where the world is going. You might want to think about it. And I've been sort of fortunate enough to take that risk and jump in and commit. Similar thing happened, in business school. I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? And then I sort of run into this woman, Judy Hicks, who is the CEO of Focus Health, and that's a healthcare services company. And I started doing like a side project for her. And she's like, why don't you come around Focus Health? And that's when I got to learn about the interchange of money in the healthcare services space, self-insured employers. So like all these mentors along the way have come along at a very pivotal point in my life where I'm thinking about what the next thing could be, and encouraged me to sort of take that risk. And I've been sort of a risk taker all my life. And I say, look, if it feels right, do it. What's the worst that happens? You're going to reinvent yourself. I changed my setting from India to US. I became an entrepreneur from being a chemical engineer. But these things happened because someone sort of believed in me and said, you can do it if you commit to it.
One thing we've talked about on the show a couple times, other founders, and that I like to really investigate, because most people don't talk about, is kind of the mentality, emotions behind it. So you mentioned about jumping in and taking risks. What do you think it is in you of like traits that help you do this? And then also for your journey of being an entrepreneur, how do how has it affected you kind of mentally, emotionally?
Wow. That's a very heavy question.
You know, we don't make it easy here.
Let me start with the easy part. So, I think curiosity and the desire to learn more. Like, if I was a chemical engineer, I knew nothing about business and raising money. And I said, look, I got to go learn. And I'll figure it out. So that, and then sort of self-belief, right? At the end of the day, you have to believe in yourself. Right? You say, look, if I can figure this out, right? I'm going to apply myself a work ethic that sort of, and I used to always think, like, I used to look around. I remember this distinct day in undergrad one day, and I'm in this like engineering test. And I literally stand up in front of the class at the beginning of the test and look around and tell myself, I am the most prepared. I might not be the most intelligent, but I am the most prepared kid in this class, and I'm going to ace this exam. And so that kind of sort of thing that says, look, if my work ethic beats none, beats everyone, right? I might not be the smartest guy, but I'll figure it out because I'll work at it. And then the curiosity part, which says, look, I want to learn more. This is a journey of learning. My whole life has been this way. And so when you combine those two things, you say, I can apply myself and solve anything, reinvent myself. Imagine today I look back, I'm like, so what? Who comes to the US not knowing where Michigan is with 2 suitcases and like some idea of what America looks like on Baywatch, right? I mean, it's like, but it's sort of a mentality that says, I'll figure it out. I want to learn new stuff. And I'll figure it out. So that's sort of the first question. The second one is a much more complicated question. So, I mean, as you probably talk to other founders, it's very lonely at the top, right? There are ups and downs like crazy, right? You're sort of, the buck stops here and you look around and all these people are counting on you to make good decisions. And you 100%. Individually, you as a group of executives that are shepherding a business, because what they're doing is giving their best every day, but the decisions you make matter to whether their best results in anything or not. And so it's tough, right? For those, who no, I don't think anyone gets into this for the money. I think that if you think you're sort of, this is a fast way to make money, this journey's got many more ups and downs. I will say this, very early on when we started the business, Peter and I sort of read a study about like businesses who have 2 founders have a much greater chance of success than one. And our sort of take over the years has been that when Peter had very up days, I had down days, we weren't always sort of down together. Like we were able to weather some of that and be there for each other. And that was sort of very helpful. Or we had at least someone to pass something by.
Right.
Right. It's like, it's not alone. And so that I think has been helpful. The other thing, my wife, who's a therapist, has taught me a lot about sort of just vulnerability, right? So early on, I was a young kid, I'm smart, I'm like, I know all the answers, I'm going to figure it out. And what I've learned over the years that I'll sort of encourage everyone to do is sort of be more vulnerable, right? Is come out and tell people when you don't have it, encourage people to come together and be just a much more authentic group together. Because there are lots of problems we face that we don't have the answers to. This is not a path that is paved. It's not like, hey, here's the directions to building a successful business. Now drive the car down the street on this thing. It's like, it's a path that's not paved. And so we have to make sort of decisions with incomplete information and risk. And so sort of being vulnerable and saying, look, I don't have all the answers, but here's what I think based on the facts, and allowing other people in to participate has been something that I've learned much more over time. And that's true sort of my own personal life and relationships, where I was much more private, I used to think. And now it's sort of, I'm just much more inclusive of the people in my life, not just during successes, but during ups and downs. And that sort of translated to work. My eldest came out as trans 2 years ago. And I talked to the company about sort of what that means to me. And I think it gave the company just a sense that, Prashant's just the same. He's one of us. Like, he puts on his pants the same way. He has the same challenges in life. And we're all in this together. And they rallied around, things we were doing at work. And similarly, I use that as an example of sort of API. So what I sort of talk to the company about, oftentimes when we get stressed, we start pointing at like, hey, you didn't do your thing, or that department didn't do this or that. And I was talking to them about API, assume positive intent, not the API that you guys all think is API, but in tech. And assume positive intent became a mantra at our company. And I sort of talked to them about how when my eldest came out, and now he's non-binary, so we'll call him Z, Zer pronouns. When Z sort of came out, Z was very concerned about people misgendering, etc. And that felt like to Zer that it was sort of not accepting Zer's identity. And what I sort of talked to Zer about was sort of giving people the benefit of doubt, giving them time, assuming positive intent, saying, look, this is new for them. They're not, we're going to assume that they're trying to acknowledge your identity, but it will take some time for them to internalize this change in pronouns, etc. And so that same example when I provided, so that was the first time the company heard about Zer coming out. But at the same time, I applied it to a place where it was applicable to them to say, look, we assume positive on each other. We're all pulling in the same direction. And so that's just one example I can think of it. I've been much more open, and it has allowed other people to help me a lot more in those moments where I don't have the answer or I'm down, etc. And I think that's sort of a part of this journey. The ups, success has many fathers. Everybody chases sort of the ups and celebrates, but I think the downs have become much more sort of a community at Evive, as well as in my own life outside of work, as I've become more open and public. And I'll credit my wife for that.
Well, you answered that tough question amazingly. So I will just tell you that was, and I love the idea of vulnerability. I agree with you. I think, that's so important to kind of build into yourself if you don't have it. Just to kind of go back a little bit on some of the stuff, and you talk about family and your father, taught business school. I'm kind of curious, how much do you think your parents impacted your journey, and how much have you thought about like what you do day in and day out impacting your children's journey in life?
I have a therapist I work with sort of on a regular basis, and we sort of examine these things a lot. My dad's work ethic and mine is the same. Like my brother was in town last week and we were talking about it, and my brother and I have both the same work ethic. Like if you told us to work 7 hours a day, 24 hours a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and said at the end of that, you'll get X, you'll accomplish it, we would do it. Right? For a finite period of time, no problem. So my dad sort of had brought that work ethic along. My mom sort of, again, my family favored educational accomplishment a lot. They were professors. We were living on an academic campus. Every kid was academically gifted and working hard. And so we grew up in an environment where you had to be academically successful or in pursuit of something, make something of your own life. And so that sort of gave me the motor to say, look, I can do more, right? My dad started in a little town, a little village. He never went to school until 6th grade. He ended up with a PhD. And so I was like, look, if he gave me the benefit of a world-class education from the day I was born, I can do more. I can make a better impact on the world. And so that was always there. My dad also helps countries build plans to develop their rural areas, farmers. That's what he does as an agricultural economist. So he's built development plans for entire countries. And I always thought he had such a great legacy on the world. He had helped the countries lift poor people, get farmers their produce to markets. He's built supply chains. And so my way, I always thought I wanted to do something that would impact the world, do something good. And so as I came out of graduate school at Michigan State, I had lots of sort of opportunities in the oil industry, in the biotech industry. And I took the one in the pharma industry because I thought it gave me a chance to do something good. So, that influence always remains. I think the big part that has happened to me as I examined my own sort of life is that in addition to valuing accomplishment, which I sort of was given this motor from my parents, I've also valued community a lot. So I've tried to build community around me. My wife's family lives in town. We get together every Sunday. The kids get to hang out with the kids. We're sort of that value sort of exists at Evive. We all get together. We sort of surround each other with more support than what a traditional employment feels like, right? People have friends at work, they hang out with them. And so the idea of sort of building community has become really important to my own life. And I talk to my kids of the legacy that I want for them is to know that I valued sort of family, and we have family dinners each day. I go show up to every event that they have. my non-binary child just texted me about those grades this morning, and I sort of, enjoyed each test. I know everything about their friends, and just the idea of sort of taking a genuine interest. Those two are not mutually exclusive. Accomplishment or this pursuit of sort of doing something good in the world and building a family community are not mutually exclusive to me, and that's what I've learned sort of over time, and that are important to me. So that's the legacy. I told my kids, I said, success for me is not you guys becoming more accomplished. Success for me is us staying close as a family and you wanting to come live by me or visit me all the time over the years. And so that sort of sets a high bar for how we do it. But again, we spend a lot of time on family therapy just to make sure that we're sort of creating healthy relationships and interactions at home. And so I think that's all sort of an investment in that community feeling that I want to create.
Sounds like you have great work-life balance. Has it always been that way? Because I think a lot of
I don't know if I'd call it
about struggle with work-life balance.
Yeah, you're generous on calling it balance. I call it work-life integration, right? So it's sort of my work and my life sort of, and even before the pandemic, I used to tell employees like, hey, if you have to go home because the cable guy is going to come at 4:00, go home, right? Because you also, when we ask you to get up at 5 in the morning and talk to guys in Bangalore, I want the same enthusiasm on both, right? It's sort of like balance in that way. It's not, I don't think I have this concept of like I work from these hours to these hours and I have family from these hours. I do have limits, right? I have limits where I even said to my kids, I said, we're going to eat dinner from 6 to 7. And I don't want your friends, all these things, meetings to be in that hour. You can do anything else the rest of the time. And so we try to set boundaries, but I think I would say work-life integration is more the norm, and the pandemic has made it much easier and much more real for most people.
100%.
So Prashant, you've built a company here over, what does the team currently look like, and any advice that you have for founders who are a little earlier on in the journey about finding the right people, because hiring can be slightly challenging.
I wish I had made exactly the right choices. Hiring is the hardest thing ever. When you have a small team like of committed folks, it's sort of relatively easy, right? Everyone's sort of in the tribe and going to battle. And as you start to expand that circle, you hope that the gist of what you had sort of remains as we get bigger. And so a lot of time is spent in sort of maintaining that culture and values, because I'm no longer interviewing every person that comes through the door, right? And so I think we talk a lot about sort of maintaining what is it that makes a person successful at Evive. And we've learned that over the years many times by making mistakes. We've thought we hired people from larger companies who could come help us scale. And sometimes we realize that, what we need is really people who are much more comfortable with living with ambiguity, and they're not. Right? And so, or they walk in expecting that there's a set of SOPs to do their job. It's like, no, you have to write the SOPs and build the system. And so I think if you hire for sort of fit, and now we sort of combine that with experienced people who have lived this stage of the journey, because we need different skills as we scale the business. People who have done this at other businesses, not necessarily much bigger in size, et cetera, but just at this type of business are helpful. Our CTO has been a CTO 3 times. Our CFO has been a CFO 4 times of similar size growth, next round of growth for us. And so they've seen some of these patterns. We'll make different mistakes, but at least they've seen some of the more common ones as they've gone through their journey. So they bring a very rich set of experiences that help me sort of know how to scale this business, because I haven't done, this is my business. This is the only one I have. I haven't gone up and come back and started a new one. Perhaps I'll be wiser the second time, but this time I'm relying on the advice of others.
Yeah.
So one thing that I always try and ask, and I know this is another tough question, but
Andy, you're only asking tough questions, man. Keep going. I don't mind.
I'm never looking for a silver bullet, but I like to find out, was there a catalyst during the growth of your business, like something that was majorly impactful to change the trajectory of growth? And so was there anything that you can identify that happened like that?
Yeah, great customers that showed the way, right? The great customers who said, we trust you for what you're doing today, but here's other things we think we need you to solve. That sort of helped us think about what to do next. Because oftentimes, like, I wish I had an 8-ball that told me exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. Instead, what I have to do is read tea leaves from other smart people where they're putting some clues out there for what other problems they might think are important to solve. And us saying, can we solve those with the expertise we have, right? We know how to deal with data. We have a passion for connecting the dots and solving those problems, right? And then we have sort of this economic engine, our customers telling us what is it that we can solve for them next. And so being able to listen to them and then adding sort of environmental information, et cetera, like the world is changing to iPhone, et cetera, allowed us to kind of evolve the business. But the customers are the key. They have needs, and if we listen to them and can solve them sort of in a scalable way, because you can also go down rabbit holes where you're solving one customer's problem, that's one customer's problem. And so you have to discern which ones are more general and which ones are not. But we've had some very great customers who have visionary sort of head of benefits who are thinking about the world in the future that have sort of helped me think about how we help our business solve new problems and grow.
That's great. How have you balanced, obviously your background science gives you unique perspective, but you're not a programmer. How have you balanced building a company that relies on tech from that perspective when you don't have the direct capability?
Well, so I know enough that no bullshit happens, right? So if you tell me this is going to take a month, I can tell you whether it generally should take a month or not. If you ask me to do it, I'm not that you don't want me to be architecting your AWS infrastructure, right? And so my role, I think, is sort of to define where we're going, what makes sense, and then I rely on our folks with the right checks and balances and conversation and trust that sort of is repaid by them as trust in me and my trust in them to kind of build that out. So again, we have experts in each of those fields. We have a security expert who's fantastic, world-class. We have a CTO who's world-class. We have a head of engineering, and he's an architect world-class, bar none. Those guys sort of do their thing, and I try to sort of do mine, and we sort of have a full bond of trust. We're all headed in the same direction. We are aligned very carefully to that.
That makes sense.
So Prashant, what does the next 12 months look like for the business? I'd love to hear what's on the horizon.
Great question. So, we're taking this technology, making it ubiquitously available. So we started out at sort of making it available to very large employers. And as we have sort of scaled and evolved and matured, we've said, look, everyone should have access to this. So we're sort of going to smaller employers and saying, we're now mature enough. We can deploy easily enough. We have good configuration tooling where we can make this easy enough for a smaller customer to deploy. So that's one. The other is we're deepening the types of things we're doing. So we started out in benefits, and we said we want to make benefits easier for people to understand and connect them to the right programs. What we have learned is that over the course of our sort of interactions with companies, that they're also trying to personalize the entire journey. They're trying to personalize onboarding, say, how can we do that better and give better advice? Because typically when you join a company, you get like a fountain, a hose of information that you have to sift through, and you're suddenly in this new space and trying to get your bearings, and you have to make benefits decisions, you have to make job training decisions. And so we can sort of personalize that journey step by step with the same technology that we use in benefits. I've also never met a head of HR who said my training systems are fully utilized. Everyone's using my learning management system, improving their skills, right? It's the same problem. Like I've never met a head of benefits who said my diabetes program is being used by all my diabetics. The fact that we can connect people to things they need applies more ubiquitously to them than just to benefits. So we're taking our core technology of matching people to what they should need, to learning, to onboarding, to financial matters, And so we're now saying, look, we have a platform that allows more generically for people to connect to things they need, programs and resources. We applied it to benefits in diabetes and musculoskeletal issues and blah, 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 blah. We can apply the same to learning. We can apply the same to onboarding. So that's where we want this to become the interaction system, the employee experience system between the employee and how they experience their employer, benefits being one part of it.
How do you drive and keep everybody in the company kind of aligned towards the vision that you have as a founder?
Well, I think we have a strategy session coming in, a 2-day strategy session where we'll talk about each of these things, and then each group will come back and say what do they think they need to do to support this vision, and then we'll agree on a set of common objectives for next year. And sort of we have these sort of quarterly, so we can check in as the market changes, as the world changes. How are we continuing to stay aligned? And so that's sort of one effort. I wouldn't say that these are all perfect, but I think we try very hard to make sure that we sort of put everything out there, because I want people to make the decision as if I was sitting with them every day. Right? They have to have all the facts of where we're going.
Yeah, makes sense. So a question that I like to ask all founders as we're kind of getting close to wrapping up is, if you were able to go back in time and have coffee with yourself before you started, what advice would you give?
Oh, wow. I think I would say pay more attention to the team, like hiring. I think we sort of take for granted that people that look like us, speak like us, feel like us are the right fit. And for a lot of times, what we have benefited most from was for people who brought different skill sets and points of view. And so, what we have learned over time here is you need a lot of different points of view to get to the right solution, sort of. And that's what, as my definition of an Eviver, as I talked about before, relies more on that sort of basic sharing of curiosity and willingness to sort of take risks and stuff like that to solve new problems. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that there's only one type of person. I think had I known that sort of early on, we would have made better hiring decisions, right? To make sure that we bring in people with a variety of backgrounds and interests. And that you only learn by making hiring mistakes. Sadly, it's no one walks in and it's sort of. I wish I was batting 300. That'd be a great ball. It wasn't. There were many times that we've hired people, and what you do is you lose time each time you sort of make a hiring mistake. You lose time that you can't get back.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've had my business 20 years, and people is all people is that center point, but it's not an easy thing to figure out, right? So pretty fun. Awesome. So how can our viewers find you or get in touch with you or learn more about this?
So the Evive is at goevive.com, goevive.com. I'm on Twitter as Dr. Prashant 1. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, but not an active user, so I wouldn't recommend that. But LinkedIn would be the best way, I think, if you want to talk to me or have a conversation. I'm happy to help. By the way, I firmly believe that concept of mentors coming along. I pay it forward. I'm here for advice. I'm not interested in sort of in monetizing my Rolodex. I'm more interested in connecting you other founders to the right folks, because that's what other people did for me. Yeah. And so, if you're thinking about a business, you're and upgrading it and need somebody to have a sounding board on, I'm happy to help.
That's awesome.
Especially in this space. This is the only space I know, by the way. So if you want healthcare or tech, I'm happy to help. Everything else, you'd have to ask my wife.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Prashant, thank you so much. This has been outstanding. I guess last thing for those tuning in, is it goevive.com?
Yeah, GOEVIVE. E for technology, Viva for life, EVIVE.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Prashant.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We will see everyone next time. Take care.
Bye.